Hi everyone, and welcome back to my artificially manufactured depression, otherwise known as my extreme hardcore world, where I'm only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor. In our last episode, we shoved a bunch of mentally deficient animals that were stupid enough to get captured into a zoo that we built, which would come to serve as a slight decoration detail for our end portal transformation. However, even though we managed to make rather substantial progress on the transformation overall, we're still not finished with it. And the reason being that we'll be expanding it for basically no reason at all, as it would most probably be completely fine as it is, but my time happens to be highly expendable, so here we are. My idea for this arguably unnecessary expansion is to start off by building a pathway platform surrounding the platform for our main building, to in turn build platforms on each of the four sides with swords sticking into them. I'm not sure why I decided on this approach and if it makes any sense whatsoever, but most of the things I do are not particularly thought through, so I guess it's on brand. But before I could throw myself back into the endless abyss that is this portal transformation, I had to go back to grab materials once more. And after having spent an absurd amount of time using more explosives than what an average toilet of a bad Indian restaurant is subjected to on a daily basis, we could finally get back to the project at hand. The outer platform that I mentioned earlier was going to have a stairway to our main platform, meaning that it was going to be a bit lower down, as I thought that would make sense. This was mainly so that we'd be able to see a bit more of all the details and not take too much focus off of our main build and make it look smaller. A strategy I'm sure many of us are familiar with. This was especially important as we were going to have swords sticking out of smaller platforms, which would add a lot to the height. So I started off by tracing out the stairways, as I needed all the help I could get to not completely mess up our octagon, as I generally struggle counting past 10. Thank God I'm not sexually active. And for this exact reason, I had done some minor testing in a creative copy of our world, as I'd prefer to not spend an exorbitant number of hours only to get fisted by the fact that it looks like absolute dog shit. Whilst testing, I made the executive decision to do the exact same thing as our main platform, where we just had a stone wall with a sandstone outline with sea lanterns. But as I mentioned earlier, the platform was supposed to be a walkway, and for said walkway, I decided to go for birch, as combining birch with sandstone makes the mean voices go away. And since we don't have a tree farm due to my severe incompetence and laziness, I had to fly over to our starter base and carry out some good old deforestation. This was just as fun as you can imagine, as this task was active enough to not be able to properly watch any videos or anything. At the same time, it's about as stimulating as listening to that one overly talkative colleague talk about their weekend. And to make matters worse, the amount of birch I needed was large enough to require me to go repair my axes. But after enduring that mental and emotional self-abuse, I could finally go back to the project once more. And in that massive time-lapse, you may have noticed an outline of skulk surrounding the entire main platform. So now you're probably wondering what the purpose of that was. And so did I. Anyways, with that weird skulk thing removed, I got on to planning out the swords I mentioned earlier. I should probably have done this earlier, as I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. My initial idea was to have the platforms be placed in each cardinal direction of the build, but I then thought it might be a better idea to have them be on the diagonals of the build. The reason for this was that I thought that building them on the diagonals would make them less obstructive to the main build, as they were going to have to be really tall. But I rather quickly realized how utterly stupid that was, as the function of the swords was to have somewhere to put our nether portal for quick access. So I went back to my original plan and started planning out our swords. I started off designing it based on the size of our nether portal. My idea for these swords was to have them each represent an element, meaning that we'd have a sword representing earth, wind, fire, and water. I have absolutely no idea how or why I came up with that idea, as it had pretty much nothing to do with the remainder of the build. But that's what I decided to roll with, as I thought it would look pretty cool. Our portal was going to be sitting in our sword, representing fire, as the nether is fiery. I know, fabulously advanced reasoning, right? But as I designed it, I realized that it didn't look like a fiery sword due to the portals being purple rather than red, meaning that my plan had backfired somewhat fiercely, as I needed to incorporate a portal somehow. So I tried incorporating some magma in hopes of making it more fiery. Needless to say, this didn't work, but the general shape of the sword was looking somewhat passable, which I decided was good enough. So I copied it over to all sides and started experimenting with the palettes for the other swords. I ran into some issues rather quickly, as our Earth sword started off looking about as appealing as average Western game character designs. But after spending an embarrassing amount of time drowning in the vast ocean that is my indecisiveness, I had finally ended up with a final design where our portal was in the guard of our fire sword. So with that, it was only a matter of building all of the swords in our real hardcore world. I started off by building all of the platforms, as we already had all of the materials we needed for them. But as always with this project, what I had waiting for me after that was to gather even more resources. And these weren't just any old resources. Most of them were completely fine, as I could just grab them from my base or casually fly off and terrorize Mother Nature. The first one was oak wood, and you might think to yourselves that it can't be that bad, as I had already carried out a deforestation mission for all the birch for our walkway. But this is where you'd be sorely mistaken, as I needed a whopping 12 stacks of wood, which equates to 16 stacks of normal logs. And I just so happened to only have 3 fully enchanted axes, meaning that I would have to fly back and forth between our wither skeleton farm and where we farmed our trees. The second issue that was arguably more severe than the wood was our red nether bricks. Red nether bricks are stupendously expensive, as every single block requires 2 pieces of nether wart. And as many of you might be aware, nether wart can't be farmed automatically, and the only source of nether wart I had was almost as underwhelming as my list of accomplishments in life. So I decided to attempt to kill both overly problematic birds with one stone by building a farm for our nether wart right next to where we were farming our wood. And I decided to do this on the mainland by my base where I had been farming wood before. Thinking back, I have absolutely no idea why I didn't just build the farm for the nether wart and farm the wood at our wither skeleton farm, as that would have saved quite a substantial amount of time spent flying back and forth. Nonetheless, once I had chopped down a bunch of trees, I moved on to all Minecraft players' favorite endgame pastime, that being to go AFK. After a bit more than half a 12-episode anime worth of time, the acme we had planted in the ground had provided us with enough wart to craft all of our red nether bricks. This meant that we could go on to building our swords, so here's yet another time-lapse. At this point, our build was essentially done, as all of the main components were in place. But there were still a few things that needed to be done before we could officially call it an end. I decided to not do all of them, because I'm rather lazy and couldn't be bothered. So the ones I decided to deal with was to add a bunch of custom trees going all around the walkway platform, as it was looking about as barren as the theaters of a modern Disney remake. And these trees were going to be identical to the ones we did for our main base, as we're using a bunch of pink anyway. And now the very last thing we had to do to end this project off in its entirety was to make the interior of the bottom floor of our main building a tiny bit more presentable. So I simply put in a floor and ceiling using the exact same patterns as the ceiling of our zoo we built in our last episode, as my arch nemesis is effort. And stairs. But that is about all the time we have for this time. I really wanted to get this project done in this episode, or at least somewhat done. And the main reason for this is that I've made the decision to call it quits for this world and start a new one. This is most definitely my absolute favorite world I've ever made, as it contains my biggest ever mega base and absolute favorite end portal transformation. Therefore, if you think I'm deleting the world, you'd be dead wrong. It's possible that I'll revisit this world at some point, but I'm not going to be playing on it actively. So thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll hopefully see you in Season 4 of this incredibly self-destructive hardcore challenge.